The dying process, in this perspective, would be the culmination or the peak of the development of the whole development of the spiritual journey, in which the total surrender to God involves the gift of life itself, as we know it. Mm-hmm. But the actual manifestation of it is going to be according to God's will in different people and their vocation and what they're supposed to do, how much God wants to use their the extraordinary healing or redemption that He's given. In other words, the fullness of redemption is the capacity to be completely transformed, to consent to the taking over, you might say, of our entire being by the divine goodness.
So that fidelity to centering prayer through the years,
mm-hmm.
of the willingness to consent to God's presence and God's action,
mm-hmm.
and the fidelity of that and the consequences of that consent is, in a certain sense, you're already dying in a positive sense,
yes,
moment by moment.
So this is why it's so necessary to get people to a practice that could move them beyond the limitations of their reason and their inclination to comment from this level of consciousness on what happens in them and around them and to them. Centering prayer, when it reaches the full consent to our nothingness and the closeness of God becomes a permanent experience, is, of course, the perfect preparation for death. Because it is death. One has already died to the false self in the night of sense and in the night of spirit, and has died to the ego in the night of no self. And so is there any self at all left? Or what remains when the false self and the ego and even the true self has been transcended? So that the person who is dying may advance in varying degrees into these levels of the full fruits of centering prayer. But if they have practiced centering prayer, they have the greatest likelihood of manifesting in their own dying process some of these examples. But it's not predictable in the sense it's a unique experience, and some saints have died in an ecstasy of love, and others, like Jesus, in an agony of torment, because it depends what mystery they're called to not just channel, but to actually redo or enable Christ to redo in them. And so Christ is dying in them as the precious in the eyes of God as the death of His saints, because they're manifesting in their particular humanity in the degree that God wants and for His purposes the actual redeeming life of Christ that has been transmitted to them, and which they now, through their own sufferings or joy, can transmit to others. So death then is not the end of anything, but the final completion of this process and the triumph of the grace of God.
And Thomas, in your own life, is that how you see these remaining years of your life, as preparing to come home?
Well, I hope I am home. It's true, I'm always stumbling around, but I've made my decision, a desperate decision to come home when I was about 18 or 17. So not that I've come home as much as I would like to, but it's such a constant, it's a journey that never ends, because what is home? It's to live in God's house all the days of our lives, and that house is this participation in the divine life, and I presume that can always become more at-homeness.
So it's living in the present moment, you're at home.
Yes, where else is there to go? I mean, I have difficulty remembering the past in the sense of what's the point? I mean, whatever good is in the past is present in each of us right now. And this is what God sees. So hope is in the infinite mercy and power of God. A combination that is surefire, you might say, because it's not relying on oneself or one good deeds or some slug of merit from part of life. It's not about those partial responses to God, which are stepping stones, perhaps, towards communion, but we're talking about a communion or a unity that is incomparable, that is oneness, that's inseparable. And it's, every now and then there's some insight into that is delightful, but it can't last too long or you would die. Because it would be unbearable to return to the dust of this world. So to be patient, to have a via media between going too soon and arriving at the banquet a little ahead of schedule, the authorities wouldn't know what to do with you. And it's not delaying it unduly when you're being called. So the hour of our death has been figured out exactly, and it's not going to change. And it won't be delayed a single minute, and it won't be anticipated by a single minute. But if we really trust God, we don't have a care in the world. And He takes care of everything. So, to be more or less there as much as we can, this is hopefully the project for the end of life, and it's certainly accelerated and brought to completion in the dying and process. And with death, which wasn't it Bach who has a chorale, "Come sweet death"? Okay. Well, it is sweet when it's perceived as the last barrier to the total immersion or loss of self in God or death in God. And the fullness of life in this expansion of spaciousness that is a home of everything that is good. So it's time for lunch.